The Shrouded City. Written and read by Michael Verzatoulis. For all anyone knew, the city had always been there. When the white ships of the Muri first touched the northern shores of Nyarthia, the city was found sparsely inhabited by melancholy elven mages and woven outcasts. When centuries before that the heretical elves left the deep woods and explored the land, they found the city empty and cold, and singing a sad song as the northern winds blew between its white marble buildings. And even when the gods first walked that dream plane, the city was already there, and they knew not whence it had come. Many names did through the ages the city have, but after the disaster at Nearath, the hubris that began the rapid decline of the Muri Empire and covered the northern land of Nyarthia with perpetual mist, a new and lasting name came to let the ancient citadel be known by: the Shrouded City. And under the melancholy reign of the eternal shroud, the city had rediscovered the ancient purpose it once had in the days of the Alabaster Empire. A home for misfits and outcasts, and most of all, mages. For no laws limiting magic did the city hold, and no external ruler's will did it recognize. For the broken northern lands no one did want, and the only man wearing a crown in the north of Nyarthia was the king behind the shroud, and his throne sat at the heart of the Shrouded City. And as much as the misfits sought the Shrouded City as refuge, so would they come to its king as pilgrims. For the king behind the shroud, it was said, knew all and could bear answer to any question. And so seekers of knowledge and lost souls would journey to the city and descend the dimly lit spiral staircase of the inverse tower toward the king's chamber of the Underpeak, hoping that the offerings they bore would be enough to grant them audience with the all-knowing figure that sat behind the shroud. The seeker had come a long way from a land that does not matter. He bore a name back then, but that does not matter either. He came with a question for the Shrouded King, yet neither does matter what that question was. The only thing that matters is the seeker's obsession, for the question and the need for its answer had entirely consumed him, and he had become nothing but a vessel for the burning need to untie a Gordian knot. And so he walked the pilgrim's path to the city that was older than the gods. When the ship approached Mistvale Harbor, he had witnessed one of the wonders of the old tales. A faint beam of light emanated from the city, shimmering through the fog like a spectral lighthouse. The Sailorman's Guide, it was called, and it was said to only be visible from approaching ships, disappearing as one would walk toward the city, something the seeker would soon discover to be true. The small ship docked amongst fishermen's boats that bore nets carrying the strange bounty of the misty sea, a commodity necessary for the city's food supply, and a strange delicacy for strange visitors. The fisherman caught the seeker's gaze as his eyes examined their seemingly evanescent silhouettes. They watched him still as he stepped with other hooded figures off the ship, walking away from the harbor and the fishing hamlet and toward the city gates. The great black doors, looking like an abyssal mouth framed by the alabaster walls, opened with only a soft creaking before the seeker and his fellow pilgrims, and they entered unceremoniously, as if it were a mundane occurrence. Yet within their core a faint whisper exploded into an overtaking shivering, as if they were traversing a gateway between worlds or completing an important initiation. Dark figures roamed between the marble buildings, seeming translucent as mist followed their every step. Despite his only recent arrival, the seeker could already tell which of the figures were residents and which other pilgrims. In the pilgrim's every step there was purpose, desire, despair. The residents walked as if in another plane entirely, only casting their shadows upon the streets of the city. A strange instinct momentarily overtook him, a need to try to appear as a resident and not a pilgrim, though he knew not why. The hooded company walked toward the center of the shrouded city. They needed not ask for directions. All roads led directly to the inverse tower. Its entrance was a low-roofed temple-like building, stern and simple in its architecture, yet dorically adorned with arcane symbols the meaning of which was lost long ago to the subtle hunger of lethe and time. They entered and started descending. Down and down they went, down the spiral of marble steps, down into an initiatory abyss dimly lit by lanterns of strangely colored glass. In their descending of the narrow steps, they formed a procession of fading shadows, walking in accordance to an inaudible Nepenthal rhythm, emanated by singing little points of light from beyond the kingdom of time. And they knew they had been walking toward revelation as they reached the fabled Underpeak. The chamber of the Underpeak was not much to look at, yet somehow everything to see. 2 guards stood before the shrouded throne, their faces hidden within expressionless helmets with narrow slits for visors and impractical breathing holes. Their armors were covered by tattered grey cloaks, and their forms seemed to follow the somber straight line of their halberds. Between them stood in its simple sternness the veiled black box that housed king and throne, illuminated by a single lantern. Liquid shadows seemed to move upon the veil of black lace that concealed the mysterious ruler, and even more, those little dancing shadows seemed to whisper, emanating quiet songs of nostalgia, calm madness, and farewell aches. And with gestures that ever so softly cut through the moving stillness, the shrouded figure made its presence delicately known. One by one, the seeker saw his fellow pilgrims approach the king with offering. Of those who were granted audience, some left with relief and joy, others with anger and despair, and others yet with resigned sorrow. Those who were rejected left with obsessed resolve to come again with better offering. The seeker knew not if he pitied more those who were given an unsatisfactory answer, or those who were given none. But what of those content with the answer they were granted? Those whose lifelong obsession had come to an end, leaving them hollow and aimless. Maybe they were worthy of pity most of all. But the seeker's thoughts were cut short, for it was his turn. In unison the guards gestured for him to approach, and he complied and knelt before the shrouded throne as he had seen the other pilgrims do. Before his knees he emptied his satchel and spread his offering of gold and jewels and waited for response. After a few brief moments, the lantern above sparked for the blink of an eye with light just slightly brighter, and the dancing shadows on the shroud calmed and parted, leaving only fine black lace, revealing the figure of the king. He was garbed in plain black veils that created a conical umbral silhouette that peaked at the point of a black crown made of primal, unshaped matter from which extended tendrils that connected to a darkness seemingly far behind. As the seeker beheld the king, the crown and tendrils briefly pulsated. And then a dreaded moment came. The guards, always in unison, moved their covered gaze toward the seeker and released an authoritative whisper. "The king rejects your offering." Calmly, the seeker gathered the gold and jewels into his satchel and stepped back. As he ascended the spiral stairs, he consoled himself by thinking that he had expected such an initial response, and that he would try again, and that perhaps material wealth was not fitting an offering. Indeed, how foolish he was. He would find much more suitable offering, and soon try again. After all, with all the rejected gold and jewels, he could live for a long while in the Shrouded City, and in time find something that would please the king. With a renewed sense of purpose, he exited the inverse tower, aiming to inquire about lodging. In the misty streets, he spotted the familiar silhouette of a fellow rejected pilgrim. They spoke, and he told the seeker that he too was determined to stay and try again. The pilgrim informed him that there were no boarding homes or inns in the Shrouded City. In fact, there was no economy around lodging at all. If one wanted to live in the thinly populated Cyclopean citadel, they would just pick an unclaimed ruin and make it their dwelling. And so the seeker did. Within the sleepy mists he found, like the remnant of a dream, a modest tower, and there his new somnial life began. During the first days, the seeker's obsession was calmed by the subtle joy of a mild sense of adventure. Telling himself he was starting his search for proper offering, he explored the markets. One would be quite pressed to say that they were beaming with life, but there was novelty to be found and curiosity to be satiated in the examining of strange wares. Hunters and fishermen would sell their bounty of peculiar and deformed small creatures. The sight of them created an aversion to the seeker, yet when he gathered the courage to approach an old woman selling soup made with the bizarre sea creatures out of a big blackened cauldron, he found upon first taste the food to be quite agreeable. Furthermore, the robes and cloaks sold by clothing vendors were much to his liking, and thus a functional stay in the Shrouded City he had fashioned. Yet he remembered that that was not his goal. Through scouring and inquiry, he found himself in possession of old arcane books, scrolls, and artifacts, buying from stranger parts of the city, or from strange wizard hermits he met exploring within the fog. And every time he found a promising item, he would once more make the pilgrimage to the Shrouded Throne, and every time he was rejected. The first few rejections did not bother him that much. There was a part of him that was excitedly eager to dive back into the mysterious corners of the city and unearth more articles of forgotten and maybe forbidden lore. In time, a narrative spun itself inside his head. It was as if the king was playing a game with him, no, leading him in initiation. It was a beautiful delusion that did not last. Soon the only thing left was frustration. He would find himself aimlessly roaming the streets of the Shrouded City day and night, his muffled inner screams swaying from burning anger to maddened, cold despair. After a while, he had almost completely surrendered his quest to a sense of crumbling resignation. There were moments when small glimpses of realization would spark inside him, and he knew then that his tyrant was not his initial obsession, but the hellish and inescapable despair in which he had trapped himself. And then clarity would fade again. If only, he thought, if only he could find proper offering and have his eternal question answered, then there would be meaning again, and calm and joy, if only. But would that ever happen? Would it? Would it? Would that dreadful shrouded figure stop wronging him? No, he thought. Despair was his destiny, and he would keep roaming aimlessly. He had decided to try one last time. He had been informed of a merchant willing to part with a very rare artifact for a substantial amount of gold and gems. It would cost the seeker all he had left, but that did not matter to him. In his state, it was most difficult to feel that there was anything left to lose. He walked through narrow alleys in the dark of night toward the place where the meeting was arranged, and there flickered in him the tiniest spark of hope, pushing back against the all-consuming darkness of despair. But when he arrived, there was no merchant there, only a band of masked cutthroats that beat him bloody and robbed him of all his remaining wealth, leaving an utterly broken being lying on the cobblestone. He was standing under grey skies on a solemn shore that received the merciless beatings of black waves. The cracked voices of lamenting seagulls danced with a chilling wind that seemed to flay his face like a razor. All was empty. There was a strange comfort to it all. He awoke in a shallow pool of blood, vomit, and piss. Slowly he lifted his shambled form from the ground and began the walk of one last pilgrimage. He walked through the fog like a ghost, and a small unbroken part of his mind finally knew what it was to be an inhabitant of the Shrouded City. He reached the gate of the inverse tower and ascended the spiral stairs. Down and down he went, into the devouring darkness, full of hungry nothingness, until he reached the underpeak. He ran maniacally toward the shrouded throne, and the guards crossed their halberds before it. But a faint whisper made them assume their previous positions, welcoming the pilgrim. He knelt, the shadows parted, and the king spoke. I cannot give you the answer you seek. There is no answer to be given. Inside him, all that was left unbroken shattered. He rose, turned his back to the king and the guards, and ran. He ran up the spiral stairs and out of the gate and through the streets, and he ran and ran and ran. It was morning now, and the light of dawn glistened through the veil of fog like fingers moving through hair. There was a music to it almost, a melodic whisper that increased in clarity with his every running step. He was like a swift breeze now, bringing gentle sway to all it touches. All now was defined by weightlessness. The more he ran, the thicker the shroud became. He hadn't even noticed that he had already left the city walls behind. He was on the shore now, stepping upon rock and sand. Soon he had found himself treading on the very surface of the northern sea. And on he ran, into the mists that stretched out to eternity.